Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. Our guest is Manny Fiteni, and Manny is in Australia. So I'm hoping one of these days I get to go down there and meet a kangaroo. I have not ever met a kangaroo. I've been to New Zealand, but not to Australia. So we've got to make that happen someday, Manny. I'll just say that upright, and
Sounds good. You're more than welcome.
We'll see where that goes. But I want to thank you for being here. And Manny is CEO of My Growth Corporation. He is the CEO of My Growth Corporation and talks about a variety of things in relating to business and mind. I'm just going to say mind activity, and we're going to talk about that as we go through all of this. So, Manny, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad we finally made this happen.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's been a while since we originally conversed, but at least now we're here.
Absolutely.
Well, tell me kind of maybe a little bit, if you would, about the early Manny, kind of growing up and what sort of got you on your path, if you will.
Okay, well, the early Manny, depends how far back you want to go, but I've always had an interest in personal development, I think. Even as a young child, I can still remember, I thought about this the other day, I can still remember seeing something about, I used to like to draw when I was younger, and not that I'm a great drawer. And there was something I saw somewhere on TV that talked about changing your brain somehow by drawing upside down. So you would take a picture that you were copying, but instead of copying it normally looking at a picture, you'd turn the picture upside down and then you would draw it that way. So you'd use your brain differently. So I kind of think all the way back to there of how I may have taken this path. Did
you discover at some point that you could use a mirror and the picture would suddenly be right side up again?
No, I don't think I discovered that at all. I think I was following whatever was being told at the time, and I found it fascinating. And I think I've always had that. I can remember as a kid, I went to a Catholic school. I was brought up in a Catholic family, so I went to a Catholic school in my, I think you call it elementary, but it's your primary. It's your young children, and I had a nun who I loved. Like, she was just she was young. She was a really wonderful lady. And I can remember talking to her, and she made a statement which has always stuck with me. Now, I was a pretty good student, but I remember her saying to me, whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. Something to that effect. And that has always stuck with me right until this day. And I do believe that. So maybe she was the person that started me off on the mind part. So my career, to quickly try to speed up, is I left school, went into banking, which was pretty common in those days, with the intention of studying accounting part-time. It was very different times, and I found it very hard to get out on time to study. I deferred it, tried it again. It was just too hard. Eventually, I got an opportunity to become a financial planner while I worked in the banking industry, which was new. So I was actually one of the guinea pigs for the bank that I work for. I was one of two that was selected. They were bankers with the intention of bringing more bankers across. I became a financial planner, did that for a few years. Wanted to go into management, moved into regional management, eventually moved into national roles, heads of roles. So I moved into executive roles eventually, and I worked for a mortgage broking firm at the end of my corporate career. So that's kind of my corporate world. I can talk about the personal stuff, the development stuff, but that might come out in our conversation.
Well, any of that you want to talk about, if you want to talk about some personal stuff along the way, that's okay too.
Let's do it along the way. As you asked.
Okay. So when did you kind of leave the corporate world and start your own company and decide to take that big step and be your own entrepreneur, as it were?
Well, I think in some ways it was forced upon me. So 2019, I was working for a quite large mortgage broking firm. I originally joined the firm because they needed someone to look after the financial planning from several states. So that's how I entered the company. Eventually, I moved into managing several states with the mortgage brokers. So, I mean, management is management. So I did that. They had a restructure, which is not uncommon in the finance world. They had a restructure. I worked in the franchise model. Every manager in the franchise model was made redundant, so they pay us to leave, essentially. And then we had, shortly afterwards, we had bushfires in Australia. And even though they weren't close to me, the smoke was everywhere. I lived near the city. And so we then moved into 2020 and we hit COVID. Now, I lived in Melbourne. Today I live on the Gold Coast in Queensland, but in Melbourne was the longest lockdown in the world. And almost impossible to try to work. I made a decision that I didn't want to take any vaccines, and that was my call. I was pretty healthy, and I'm still very healthy today. But if you decided not to take it, you were no longer allowed to work. So I couldn't even look for a job. It became a waste of time. So we spent the next few years locked down for 23 hours a day. Couldn't travel further than 15K, which doesn't mean a lot to your viewers if they're American, but only a few miles away from home.
Right.
So I didn't see my father die. I couldn't see my mother because she was too far away. So yes, anyhow, it was so it kind of in this period I decided, well, you know what, I have spent a long career in corporate and I've enjoyed it, but maybe it's time for me to kind of expand on my personal development to help others grow as well, both businesses and individuals. So this is when I started my growth corporation with the intention of developing tools, etc., for people and for small business people in particular that are helping others like coaches, etc., so that they could get their own exposure. So that's how I got to this point.
Yeah, I know the feeling. When the pandemic hit, I was actually in New York on the 5th of March doing a speech in 2020. Got back to the hotel and heard that they were going to probably shut down the city the next day. And I was slated to fly back to California later in the afternoon on the 6th and made the decision, I'm not going to wait. And I'm glad I didn't, because I might have been kept in New York City. Yeah. So I flew back home and I started looking for things to do. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And I did two things. One, somebody had suggested that people are going to be afraid of the pandemic, and I had survived being in the World Trade Center and didn't exhibit fear, so I ought to do something about trying to teach people. And I realized from their comments that I had spent 20 or 19 years speaking, and I had not done anything to really teach people how to do what I did, which was to be able to focus and not let fear, as I would put it, overwhelm or blind one. And so I decided that maybe this is the time to start to write a book, and met up with at the introduction of a friend who helped me write Thunderdog. I met Carrie Wyatt Kent, who worked with me, and we wrote Live Like a Guide Dog, which was lessons that I've learned from 8 guide dogs and my wife's service dog, lessons that I learned from them about life. And I still to this day say I've learned more from working with 8 dogs or 9 dogs with the service dog than I've learned from all the management experts in the world, because dogs generally live in a way that allows them to be able to focus no matter what's going on. They live in the moment, and they don't do what if about everything under the sun. So I decided to do that, and I also started to learn about podcasting, and from that, here we are. So
okay, that's interesting.
So I appreciate that the pandemic was a time to switch, and now with the world somewhat unlocking again, I travel and speak again, which is kind of fun, and I enjoy that. I finally made it to be able to speak in London last year, but still we haven't got to Australia. So can use your help to find speaking engagements down there.
I'll remember that.
I'll leave it to you
when time comes about, but you're always welcome in Australia.
Would love to make it down there. But, you've started the company, and So exactly what does Mind Growth do?
Sorry,
My
Mind
Growth.
Growth.
My Growth.
My Growth?
Yeah.
My Growth. So My Growth has several things that we've built out. So we're building out an ecosystem. So essentially, we have Mind Growth 360, which is probably where you use that
Yeah.
name then. And Mind Growth 360 is a social media only for personal development. So it's not the normal stuff where I'm putting what I've done today, etc. It's more about it's a normal social network, but we want to start encouraging people. We haven't pushed this yet into the marketplace properly, but we've built it. Where we want people like coaches to bring their clients. We want different trainers to bring their clients. We want podcasters because we have podcast station on there as well. So which goes to all the different stations. So we essentially want people to find a place where they can promote themselves. We also have a directory website, which is called Personal Development House. And essentially anyone that has a business, it's a little bit like a product review type site. You know, it's where people can do reviews on you as a company, etc. We're building at the moment a brand new app. I think we may have talked about this when you and I briefly spoke a few months ago. That is still probably about another month away, but essentially that is an app and a website that helps people speed learning by using flashcards and also competitive type battles. So on the individual side, you'll be able to compete with people across the world and different topics and learn different things. And it's a gamified environment. And we've also built out for small business and we've built out for schools and universities. So that's coming out next year.
I think we talked about it a little bit, but I don't recall. Will the app be accessible? Do you know?
No, you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
At the moment, it won't be, only because we've had so much complexity with it. Like it's been delayed by months. And I didn't want to add another lot to the developers. Otherwise, they're just going to add another cost to me at this point. That's not to say it won't be in the future, because after our conversation, I looked into it and thought, yeah, that's something I want to add. When I've got it launched and it's working properly, then I want to be able to add that in as well.
Well, I'd be glad when you launch it to check it out and see how accessible it is from the outset.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. I will do that.
That would be fun. So would love to explore that. So tell me, what is mind congruency, which is something that you talk a lot about and is an integral part of you. So what is mind congruency?
So mind congruency essentially is developing, you talked about the dogs a moment ago and how focused they are. And for me, this is about developing what I call a focused mind. So essentially, we make decisions in our lives and we go down a certain path and then we sabotage ourselves. We don't necessarily are even aware that we sabotage ourselves. So everybody knows, or most people know, that we have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. They both play different parts and they both come about in different parts of our life. So when you're born, until you're around about 10, you're really mostly the subconscious. It learns a certain way, but it's almost like your operating system. So the way I describe it is a little bit like a computer. Think about the operating system of how a computer is meant to work. If somebody doesn't program the computer properly in your computer and you type in and say, I want this result, and you get something completely different, it's because it hasn't been programmed properly and the operating system needs to be upgraded, for better words. We are a little bit like that. We get that in our childhood and we pick it up usually from whoever is caring for us, usually our parents. We pick up habits, we pick up positive stuff, we pick up the negative stuff. The conscious mind is usually the short-term memory, the analytical side that makes decisions on what we want to achieve in life or goals. But then when you set out to do a goal, you have behind this subconscious operating system. If it conflicts with your goal, then you're going to start to sabotage yourself. So there's lots of examples in life that you'll set out to do something, you'll research it, I mean, in my book, I talk about a friend. I don't use his real name, but he was someone that I knew for over 40 years. I knew him since we were very young. He's a good guy, but he had a father who was quite intelligent, high media executive, and I'm not sure what his life was like when he was a child, but he essentially would go on a path where he'd make a decision with his conscious mind and say, I want to go down this path and do this, and it might be an entrepreneurial thing. He could spend one whole year studying it, exploring it, and whereby those that are congruent with the subconscious that says, yep, this is aligned with the goal, 1 year later he would sabotage it and say it's not going to work without even having barely even started it, if he started it. So my congruency is, until you can align the two, you are going to sabotage your results. This is in business, this is in personal life.
So essentially you're saying that your friend had a goal, but his subconscious was sending him a different message, and so he just really couldn't make the two work together.
Correct. And everybody does this, but they're not aware of it. So I've talked about this before with other people. We display different patterns and different habits, and they're all coming from the subconscious of how we operate. So you might be saying something to me, and I might be talking to you, and I'm going, now I wonder where that habit's come from. And sometimes I say it to people. I'll say to them, so which parent did you get that from? And they'll stop. And then they'll go, oh, that's my father. And people are unaware consciously that they are playing out patterns and programs that they were given many, many years earlier. Mm-hmm. And so some of them are positive, some of them are negative. And until you're able to change that, then you're going to play it out. And it may go against what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and the question is, when you're trying to achieve it, is it more your subconscious or your conscious mind that's trying to achieve it? And we don't listen to that nearly as much as we should. My favorite example that I use regularly to talk about that is the game Trivial Pursuit, when somebody reads a question and you immediately think of an answer, but then you stop and you wait a moment and you go, no, that was just too easy. That can't be the right answer. And so you look at a different choice and you choose something else, and it turns out that the original choice was the right one. But we don't listen nearly enough to our subconscious minds or our inner voice to deal with that.
That's true. And that's called intuition as well. Our intuition sits there, which is what makes some of the best leaders in the world.
And you were talking about intuition, and I think that certainly is another way to put it. But the reality is, for whatever reason, we choose not to listen to that part of us that absorbs everything that goes on around us anyway.
Correct.
Which is so unfortunate.
Well, I think the thing is we second guess ourselves. We're just not sure that, are we right? Are we just imagining something? And that's because the conscious mind does operate very differently to the subconscious. I sometimes look at the subconscious like a little child. It effectively has lots of information that it's been taking in along the way. There are certain ways to input into it, like a computer, and it will give you the result that it's been, for better words, trained to do.
Right. But it is so unfortunate but we're also encouraged in so many ways not to listen to what's going on internally. We've been taught by so many people in so many ways that we just don't have the instincts of animals. We don't do things in this way. We just really have been taught not to listen to our inner selves very much, which is so unfortunate.
I agree. And you'll find those that are very capable, for better words, who do extremely well, even when they're dealing with other people, are quite intuitive because they're picking up on minute signals or indicators that others just ignore. You know, this happens in relationships all the time, where we might be in a relationship, could be a personal relationship or working relationship. Somebody says something and we don't pick up all the different things that's coming from the internal, which come out on our face, our eyes, all those type of things.
Right. And the result is that we don't really absorb the information that would help us make better choices. Or they could.
I think we don't trust ourselves sometimes. We sort of think, maybe that's not true, or maybe that's not the case. It is almost like building a muscle. It's something that you have to do regularly until it becomes second nature for you.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that we talk about in my book that was published last year, Live Like a Guide Dog. Dogs do have a lot of things built into their instinct, and I think we essentially do, but we choose to, or have been taught to, ignore them, which is unfortunate. But dogs, for example, don't do something that we do all the time, which is we what if everything to death. Everything is a what if thing. Well, what if this happens? What am I going to do? What if that happens? What am I going to do? And most of those things we don't have any real control over at all, but we still worry about them. And I will not ever say don't be aware, but we need to learn that we don't need to what if everything, that we need to what if the things over which we have control, and then leave the rest essentially alone so that it doesn't overwhelm us or cause us fear, which is one of the, I believe, root causes of so much fear in our lives, because we worry about so much stuff that isn't relevant.
We do. So we need to be aware of what we're projecting out that's building out our current reality, for better words. Are you familiar with the mirror principle?
Not really. Go ahead.
Okay. So this one kind of crosses over from science, and I'll use the word spirituality, kind of crosses over. So everything that is internal that we push out into the world is what we will see in our world. So, for example, if we're angry and we hate, we will find people that hate. We'll also find even the good people that come into our lives. That's going to be fed back to us because we've been feeding that to them. So the mirror principle is like looking in a mirror. What you are seeing in your world today is what you're projecting into your world. And we're not aware of what we project into our world a lot of times. Sometimes we understand our background, that maybe it was not a great place to start. But until we learn, so this is kind of the science bit. All things on this earth and this universe, for that matter, are made up of some type of energy. That's science. Science know that atoms vibrate, etc. They all vibrate at a different energy. So you are pushing out that into the world, and then that reflects it back to you, which is the mirror principle. Now, that may not be what your listeners usually listen to when they're on your podcast, but essentially it's understanding that what's internal, in this case your subconscious, is what you're projecting out. And until you change it, you'll wonder why your world hasn't changed.
Yeah. What immediately pops into my head is Gandhi once said, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you're constantly projecting hatred, that's what you're going to find.
Correct.
Or it will find you. And it's not productive to do that, but some people seem to do it, and that's the way they are. So what do? You choose to deal with them or not.
Well, you'll find as you grow. So there's a concept which I didn't come up with the wording, but it makes perfect sense, is the autopilot. So you're familiar with an autopilot in a plane.
Right.
The pilot takes a plane up, turns on the autopilot. It's designed to go at a certain speed, the plane at a certain height. If there's a gust of wind that hits the plane and pushes the plane up, it's designed to come back to what the autopilot was set at. So think of your conscious mind like the autopilot. It's been set at a certain level. You didn't necessarily set it yourself, by the way, but it's been set at a certain level. So when you go to achieve things in life, and you want to rise above that level that was set at, a couple of things usually happen. Number one is you'll find reasons why what you're doing is not going to work. Like my friend I described earlier, his autopilot was lower, he was aiming for something higher, and he pulled himself back, unconsciously doing this. The other thing is we will hang around people that have an autopilot similar to us. So let's say, for example, you're trying to achieve something in life, you're aiming for something, and all your friends' autopilot is at one level, and you're now aiming for this higher level in achievement. Some people will encourage you, but there'll be a lot of them, if their autopilot is lower, that will be either secretly happy for you to fail, because that is not where they see you. They see you at their level of flying,
right?
And you want to fly higher,
right?
So you'll start, if you do adjust your subconscious, you'll start to drop certain people from your life because you're now moving into a higher level.
How do we talk to our subconscious system to help us work toward making change or achieving better congruency, if you will?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways. There's how do you talk to yourself and how do you talk to others? Because you might manage people, or you might be in a relationship and you're trying to help somebody. So the subconscious doesn't work in words so much. It works in symbols and metaphors. So think of the great teachers of the world. Take, let's say, the Jesus of the world, just as an example. Most things that he taught about, if you ever read what he talked about, were done in stories. They were metaphors. Mm-hmm. So why did he do that? Because what happens is when you tell a story, the conscious mind is engaged by it. It's listening to the story. You're watching a movie, for example, going, what a really cool movie. It's engaged. If it's been designed in a way that there's a meaning behind it, the subconscious will pick up the meaning and change itself, because then it understands the message. The problem that we have in a lot of times is that the conscious mind's like a gatekeeper. If I said to you, I need you to, you should change, think of a parent doing this. Stop doing this. This is not what you should be doing. It's like giving someone an order to do it.
Right.
That is an instruction to the conscious mind, not an instruction to the subconscious. And the conscious mind will fight it.
Right.
So if you wanted to talk to another person, let's say, for example, I was trying to convince you to do something, or I wanted to help you at something, I would tell you a story. I usually tell real stories, but the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's not real. It's like a child. So it will believe whatever you tell it. If I structure it in a certain way, I will help you create change. So I did this in executive roles. I would have someone in front of me. I would try to work out why they are where they are, or where their barriers were, and then I would tell them a true story, in my case, of someone else who was in the same position as them and how they overcame that, so that their subconscious would get this story. So that's a really important part. So in regards to yourself, there's a couple of ways that I, firstly, it understands repetition. So think about, think of those that are listening that have ever been to the gym or into sports of some type. You don't go to the gym once or twice or three times like a lot of people do as a New Year's resolution and then go, right, now I'm fantastic. What tends to happen until you break that barrier is that you only do it a few times. You get quite sore because your body's not used to it, and you start making excuses. Well, actually, I'm really busy. Work's got really busy. I can't get to the gym. And so there might be some truth to that, but there might also be your subconscious saying, this is not what I'm trying to do right now. This is not part of my habit. This is not part of my patterns. So in order to change it, you need to be repetitive. I talk about catch and replace. We are unaware of our patterns and our programming. When you start becoming aware of how you are operating in a circumstance, you then catch it and you replace it with something else. It could be the way you talk, for example. You might, let's say you swear constantly. Maybe you were brought up that way and that's something you do. And you go, this is not going to kind of work if I want a white collar job. So you go to swear, but you are aware and you catch yourself and you replace it with something different. Enough times over time that your mind is now trying to go towards something completely different.
Right.
I also look at just before you go to sleep, it's before you enter REM sleep, you start to imagine what you're trying to achieve in something, because the conscious mind is starting to slow down, the subconscious is in play. And by thinking about something and playing it over until you fall asleep, you're starting to enter that into the subconscious.
Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that I talk about in Live Like a Guide Dog a lot, because the reality is, as you pointed out, the mind is a muscle, and we have to develop that muscle. And what I talk about a lot is fear, and saying to people in the book that a lot of things happen in our lives because we're afraid of something, or it didn't go exactly the way we planned, and so we get all upset about it, but we don't ever take the time to really analyze it. And what I urge people to do before they go to sleep or while they're falling asleep is think about what happened today. What worked, what didn't work. I won't use the word failure, because I think that everything is a learning experience, and failure is kind of too much of an end, and I don't like that. But I would rather people think about what worked, what didn't work. Even the stuff that worked well, could I have done it better? The stuff that didn't work well, what can I learn from that? What was I afraid of that didn't help me? I think that, as you point out, the subconscious, the inner part of us is in play, and we need to do more to bring it out in the open.
So think about, I don't know when you and I spoke a few months ago, but I don't know if I talked about when I was 23 and I was in a bank robbery. Did we ever have that conversation?
I don't think so.
Remember?
I don't recall right off.
So as I mentioned earlier, I started in banking originally. At the age of 23, I was working for a bank, and in those days, bank robberies were a weekly event in one of the banks somewhere. There was always a bank robbery. And so when I joined the banking industry, you're taught very early to recognize certain things if a robbery were to take place. And it was called a bandit description form. So essentially what you did is, if there was a robbery, you would write down all the different things that you saw during this robbery. So we got trained in that. But what I did is, wherever I worked, in whatever branch world that I worked in, is that I would imagine quite regularly, what would I do if a robbery took place? So one day I'm working in this branch, and there was virtually no security. I mean, you could virtually put your hand over a very low door and open the door and walk straight into the back of the bank. So there was no security at all. And it's around about almost closing time. I wasn't aware of it at the time. I was what they called a lending officer, and I worked for the main manager, which basically meant he went out, brought new business in. It was commercial lending, business lending. He would bring it back to me. I would do the numbers, and I put the whole submission together for him to sign off on. And that was kind of my role. It was a busy role. And at the time, I had somebody helping me. So I had an office, and it was an office that was like wood up to a certain point, then it was glass, and then it was open going up.
Okay.
And I had a door, but my door was permanently open. And so my office was right behind the tellers who served the cash. And there was maybe 4 or 5 tellers that were in front of me. Anyhow, one day I'm sitting at my desk talking to this person, working away on a submission, and I heard a loud voice. Now, our boss was a loud person, so I just assumed he had come back. Anyhow, I looked up, and I noticed a person wearing a balaclava with a sawn-off shotgun in his hand. So I stood up, told the person with me, get down, it's a robbery. I stood out of my office, told someone else to get down, it's a robbery. And then I thought, I got to set the alarm off, because there's what they call a silent alarm.
Silent alarm.
So I turned around, realized the alarm was actually going, because you could hear it. It was a certain ring.
Right.
So I turned back and thought, well, am I going to walk over and take over? Now, I'm a 23-year-old. There's a lot of people older than me in this place. And I stood there and assess the situation. And I looked around the room. So this guy basically threw 5 bags over to the main teller and said, fill the bags. I want everything. So she gives the bags to the other tellers, and I'm watching, and then I look around the room, and there's everybody, all my colleagues are under desks except for me. I'm the only person standing except for the tellers because they didn't have a choice in the matter.
Right.
He then calls for the bags back and says, give me the bags. And she hands them back, and he goes, where's the 5th bag? And she goes, you only gave me 4 bags. So he takes the sawn-off shotgun and he points it at her head, and it was like the longest 20 seconds that I ever would have thought of. And he runs, and then I run. And I ran to the door, and in this split second it was do I chase or do I stop? I locked the door, and I locked the door. I decided that was not the smartest thing to chase a guy with a gun. So I locked the door. Our customers were trying to rush out because obviously they were fearful of what had happened, and we explained that they were witnesses to a robbery.
Right.
So effectively, police came, counsellors came, regional management turned up, and most of the staff went up to the staff room, and we used to have a cabinet of alcohol for Friday night drinks. They drank everything. Now, everybody said afterwards, how come we were watching you and we could see you and we were scared for you because you were the only person we could really see underneath the desks. Why didn't you get down, number one? But number two, how come you're not in the same state that we are in? Like, we are absolutely petrified to walk back into this place, and you're okay. And I said, I never said anything. I didn't have an answer for it. Mm-hmm. It's later on that I realized that I had been conditioning my subconscious for at least 2 to 3 years at this stage. I had been playing in my head what would happen if there was a robbery. So it wasn't my conscious mind doing all these actions that I just described. My subconscious was trained to take over, and it acted out. So you either do fight or flight in a situation like that.
Right.
I didn't fight, but I didn't do the running either. And so in that scenario, I had conditioned myself to take over a situation.
So your subconscious was also telling, in a sense, I would think, your conscious mind what to do.
Correct. Well, the conscious mind was probably not even there, for better words. Like,
might have been.
It was really just saying, let's think of this scenario. You go on a trip to Africa and they take you in a safari, and somehow you're confronted by a lion. Not too many people would stand there, and not too many people would be analytical and going, now, I should probably hide behind here. No, you're going to most likely run. And you're going to run as fast as you can to get away from it. And that's your fight or flight.
Yeah, and that's not going to work if the lion decides to chase you.
Well, correct. You probably don't have many choices in that example unless you've got a weapon to protect yourself.
Well, that's a different story. Yeah.
But the scenario I'm trying to give is that we are reacting according to how our subconscious has been conditioned.
Right.
Mine was conditioned to be calm in that situation. So much so that I was able to fill out a bandit description form, what he was wearing. He had a balaclava, had a sawn-off shotgun, left hand. I was able to do all of that. There's no one in the room that could do that. Mm-hmm. Because they were so traumatized in the fight or flight, and they were in the flight situation. They just wanted to get out of the room.
And I guess, of course, the curious guy in me wants to ask, did they catch the guy eventually?
They did eventually. And funnily enough, he was in a stolen car, which was taken from some suburbs away. And it was actually a bank manager's car that he stole. And we actually, years later, I met the guy. So there you go. So, yes, he did get caught. They usually get caught.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, they get a nice little lump sum of money, I guess.
But your bandit description form had to help.
To be honest, I don't know what happened after that. I mean, it was interesting because, obviously I had quite a few friends there, and the main teller was a good friend of mine. She never worked in the bank again, or at least not in a branch-facing environment. We all had made an agreement that we would come the next day for a meeting with the counsellor as a group, even if we didn't stay.
Right.
I don't think they were going to open the branch, but myself, the manager, and there was another manager there. We met early. We cleaned up the branch because we had fingerprint dust all over the counters. We had police tape everywhere. So we removed all that before everyone arrived. But a lot of those people were traumatized because their subconscious got knocked out and their subconscious was not trained to take over in that circumstance.
And I suppose it sort of goes without saying that I resonate very well with what you're talking about, because that's essentially what happened to me dealing with the World Trade Center. I spent a lot of time learning what to do in an emergency, never thinking that there was going to be one, of course, but I also had the motivation that I needed to do it because I could be in the office alone, but even if I weren't in the office alone, I was the leader of that office, and so I needed to be able to do what any leader would do. And for me, one of the decisions was, well, I don't read signs, so I better really know what to do. And we never had a smoke-filled situation where signs were invisible, but by the same token, the fact that I really knew what to do helped. And so didn't exhibit fear. Well, I'm not going to say I wasn't afraid, and I have, as I tell people, a great imagination. Reading a lot of science fiction, I was imagining things that were worse than what was actually going on at times. But the bottom line is that I was able to function and focus, which you are right, most people could not do or would not do because they didn't train their minds to do that.
So you're a good example of this, whereby you had conditioned your mind, you trained your subconscious to act a certain way, and it did.
It did. Which,
so, yeah.
Go ahead.
I know. So all I was saying is, until people understand that you need this congruency, so when something takes place, you have designed it that it will continue. No different to going to the gym. It's building that muscle and continuing, not stopping it and sabotaging yourself.
And the muscle is there if you'll build it.
Correct.
So, what are the, if you will, the pillars of high performing teams? What are the things that make high performing teams high performing teams?
It comes down to environment. So what you're doing is creating an environment that people feel that they can grow. So, sometimes you can talk to a manager and you say, "Oh, do you have an open door policy?" And they go, yeah, absolutely. People can come and talk to me anytime they want. Go talk to their staff and they go, "There's no way I'm talking to that guy because he'll just, he'll abuse me or tell me off or not listen to me." So you need to have a certain environment to build a high-performing team. You need to have certain traits that sit behind that as well, as a manager. So as a manager, I go into this more when I train businesses, but there's certain traits around the integrity. It's one thing to tell people what they should do, but you go do the opposite thing. It's like children.
Yeah.
Children pick up on their parents and go, "Hold on, you told me to do this." And they go, No, you just do what I tell you to do. Oh, it's not what I do, it's what I say.
Do as I say, not as I do.
That's not how the world really works with people.
Right.
People don't respect you anymore. So what I do in the trainings that I do with businesses is we tear down the individual. So the way we operate is the environment's really important of how this operates. Then the traits of the individual need to be looked at of what makes a leader, makes the leader, those different traits so that they understand it, because, you've been in management and you would understand this, but the majority of managers in the world have had no leadership training at all. They effectively were maybe good at their previous job, or, you know, they were filling a position, and they step into being a leader. It's a little bit like having your first child, I think. You have never had a child before. There's no operating system. What am I supposed to do? You might go to your parents for some help and hope that they were good enough to be able to tell you how to do things. But management's a really good example. No one is given this manual. And what tends to happen is we, as companies, both small and large, run by the seat of our pants. We put someone in, we hope they're going to do a really good job, and maybe they will, or maybe they will disenfranchise half my company because they don't have the skill sets. The last one is my congruency. And the reason why my congruency sits in that is because you are bringing to the table as a leader your past conditioning. So if I were to hire you, Michael, I got a little bit of understanding of how you think and how you understand this type of concepts. But I could bring someone else to the table that is not necessarily leadership material. And they're not leadership material because their conditioning is, I'll just do anything I have to do to get my next promotion or my next bonus.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. We all want our bonuses and we all want our promotions when we're in a corporate world. But if it means burning most of your team, sooner or later that's going to come back to bite you, because that team will turn on you or they will leave and you'll have high turnover.
Yep.
And you cannot use the excuse forever that they're just not very good at what they do. Most likely you hired them and you also didn't develop them.
Well, and the person who brought you in supposedly to be the leader didn't really work to make sure that you were properly developed or give you the training that you needed either.
Correct.
Yeah, which is really the issue. I know that one of the things that I've said it before on discussions like this, that I always said to every salesperson I ever hired was, you've convinced me that you should be able to sell our products, but my job isn't to boss you around and tell you what to do. My job is to work with you to figure out how I can use my talents to augment what you do to help you be more successful. Because I know personally what I do when I'm dealing with customers and so on, and I know that a lot of what I do is different than what most people in sales do, because I tend to listen more. I tend to really look at what people are saying, and I ask tons of open-ended questions. I really don't like closed-ended questions, but I learn so much. And I think that's so important, that I want to be able to always augment what other people are doing that may be working for me. And I think that's the best way I can develop trust. And the people who got that did really well. And the people who didn't ended up not really being very successful at the company and eventually were made to go away.
So when I build high-performance teams, like any team that you inherit, not everybody is high-performing at this point. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 people that are very successful or very good because they're just driven themselves. They're driven people. And unfortunately, a lot of managers use that as their stepping board or their what they tell their managers of how good they are. Look at the success of my team. When in reality, it's a small percentage of your team. Your success is when you're getting the majority of your team across the line. So when we work with managers, we want the manager to learn how to become a leader, not a manager. Anyone can be put into a management position. Management is not about telling everybody what to do. It's part of the role, but it's also where people are so engaged because of the way you operate that people see the vision of where you're trying to take it. And that vision is what they have bought into, and they are prepared to follow you towards that.
Well, yeah.
Now, a lot of people are not good at that.
Yeah.
But if you have the skill set to take someone that's non-performing to become a performer, then you are achieving as a leader.
And it may very well be that person could maybe someday even be your boss. And I don't ever have a problem with that. If somebody is if somebody is that successful and they do that well, and I contributed to that, I'm good.
So I have exactly the same attitude as you. I don't think I've had anyone pass me, but it might be because they were in sales roles and didn't go towards management. But I have no problems because I look at it that I contributed to that success.
I had a president of a company that I worked for once who visited me, and we were talking about sales, and he was absolutely convinced that the highest paid person in the company should be the president at all times. And my belief, I'm sorry?
I've heard that before because I've worked in banks, and I was a financial planner. Some of them were earning more than the executives.
Well, and that's my point, is that my belief is that the high-performing salespeople, if they're really doing a good job, ought to be the highest paid people in the company by definition because of what they do and how successful they are. And I always was of the opinion that if I could help people do that, I wanted to be one of those people, but if I could help other people do it, and if they made more than I did, I'm good with that because I'll be more successful as a result anyway.
So I feel the same way. And I think a CEO, even though there's obviously an element of ego in that conversation, the way they need to look at it is that if that person is earning more than me, that means they're generating more than me. They're draining more income to the organization than me. And CEOs, in a lot of cases, are paid, depending on the size of the organization, are paid very healthy bonuses based on results. So that individual that you're paying quite well has got you those results so you can get your bonus.
Right. And you should appreciate that and honor that.
I think so. I mean, long as the person's doing it legally.
Well, they're
doing it the right way and not hurting anyone along the way. Then why not recognize performance? Because what happens is the moment you try to put a cap on people, they might accept it for a little while, but after a while, they're going to say, you know what, this is the wrong place for me. I can go make that money for somebody else over there who might allow me to do what I want to achieve.
Yeah. And you should be given the opportunity to achieve. And especially in a sales environment, as you well understand, good salespeople should be very high performing and be highly compensated based on what they do.
Right.
And that comes about because a contract was created and everyone signed off on it. So people should buy into that, but it doesn't always happen that way. It's so unfortunate.
Well, part of the what sits in the subconscious too is your value systems. So you and I were brought up by different people. We have different experiences. There's some that might be similar, but we may have similar value systems, or we may have different value systems. And once you understand, and this is part of the training that you want to give leaders, is when you understand the value systems of the people that work for you, you start to understand how to speak to those people. Mm-hmm. So a great salesperson is usually at a point in their life that, number one, they're very driven. Money's usually can be, not always, but they like all recognition, is why they're really driven to write a lot of business. Mm-hmm. So how do you manage that person when you know there's certain restrictions in the world that you can and can't do in your own business environment? The way to manage a person that's top level in their value systems is to give them understanding of what parameters look like. So, for example, let's say you're working with me, Michael, and I say, look, you can pretty much do anything to get things across the line as long as it's legal and as long as you understand you can make as much as you like in regards to your bonuses or your commission, whatever that looks like. But I can't increase wages, for example. And the reason I can't increase is because I don't make those decisions. They actually might come from above me.
Right.
So once a person understands their parameters, then they can go out and do what they want to do. But if you don't tell them at the start that these are the parameters and they go, and then you start changing the goalposts. Yeah. So when I was in sales, and I did sales in banking, and I guess financial planning is that there's an element of sales and influence. The banks were well known to say, right, now this is how we're going to measure you for this year. And you go, right, and then you're meeting it. You're even exceeding it. And then they go, we've changed our mind. Now this is how we're going to measure you. And suddenly you have to not only readjust, but also realize that now you're no longer the top person because they have changed the rules.
Right.
That's not the way you would manage someone, because after a while, if you change it too many times, they will say, you know what, it's too hard to write business for you. You are not going with you've told me this and I believed you. So you work with someone's values and understand it. And then you do all the things you described earlier, which is you listen. But it isn't just hearing, it's listening to the cues.
Right.
People use certain syntax, they use certain tonality when they speak, and you will pick up on what they're really saying to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it's done right, it really is all about trust, and you can develop a good trusting relationship. But as you point out, if someone is constantly changing the rules, really hard to develop a level of trust.
Correct. And it is a trust thing. I mean, I used to say to staff, you're going to spend more time with me than you will with your spouse or your partner.
Right.
Because we're here for so many hours and under a lot of pressure too. Maybe more so than in your relationship.
Right. But it can be very rewarding, and that's why we work together.
Correct.
So what kind of tools and also what is the future of My Growth?
So My Growth...
what kinds of things are going on?
Okay, well, I've described that we're building an app. We also do training in business. So we take small businesses, large corporations, and it's more than, and mindset's part of it. So what I don't want listeners to think is they listen to these conversations and they think, I don't do mindset in at work. We're numbers. I remember having a conversation with a CEO, very senior in the financial planning world, and we were sitting down. He just hired me, and we were sitting down at a coffee shop, and he said to me, "It's all about numbers. It's all about the numbers, about the numbers, about the numbers." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. The numbers are the results, but they are the results of people. Mm-hmm. Without the people, you don't get the results." And so, to answer your question, a lot of the work that we do when we're working with businesses, and what you do as well, is yes, we want these results. They're the end product of building the person or the people to get those results. That's where you start. You don't start with the results. You start with building what you've got.
Yeah.
So we do that. Next year, we'll probably be doing a lot around individuals as well, where we take them on workshops, most likely here in Queensland, because it's usually pretty sunny up where we live. A little bit like Florida, similar weather, I think. So we'll probably end up doing this for people across the world, where we'll have small groups and we work on the individual and they work on themselves, because once you unlock it, this is not business, this is for individuals now.
Sure.
But from a business, so business is really important, because we don't think businesses really tackle this very well. If they want true results, then they're going to have to change certain things. We've talked about the directory we've got. I've just built out, I've just started to build it, looking at developing the mind at the young age, at a child's age, the 3 to 8 type thing. Because I never look at, even though I know that's where it all starts, I never do anything with children per se.
Right.
So we built out a YouTube channel which is called Little Minds Wonder Lab, and they're cartoons. But the cartoons are just stories, with animals or cartoons of people. Teaching them personal development stuff, which is not heavy. It's at the level of a child. So that they pick up about sharing with people and about. So we'll teach all these things in our cartoons.
Well, I think that's really pretty cool, and I think it's so important to do that because it's, no matter what, that is the basis for forming good teams, forming good relationships, And if people take it to heart and truly learn from it, then that's as good as it gets.
Absolutely. I think, look, those that have children are unaware of how much influence they have on the future of their children. So you marry a partner, they bring to the table their past, you bring to the table your past, you bring to the table your patterns, your operating systems, and then you are imprinting them on these children that you've brought into the world.
Right.
Now, we all go through different circumstances in life, and there's a lot of stress and money and things like that. But when you become aware of a parent of how to do this with children yourself, you create someone that is more resilient as an adult because they have aligned their mind to move forward when they set goals.
Yeah. And when you enter into a relationship with a partner, it's also true that if you do it well, you learn from each other. And you may, and if you truly learn from each other, then you probably ultimately come to, assuming you're somewhat different at the beginning, you come to a place where you kind of more collectively think alike, but that alike might be totally different than what you each started with when you first began the relationship.
That's true. So because we're unaware of how we operate, take an individual that goes into abusive relationships. Now, I'm sure if you interviewed these people and said, why, did you deliberately choose an abusive man or woman or whatever you choose? And they go, no, I thought I was choosing a really, really nice guy. What people are unaware of is that they're conditioning, and then they get out of the relationship and they go, my next guy is going to be like this, this, and this. And instead, they go back into the same type of relationship, right? So here's this thing about their conditioning. They are looking for certain indicators that they think is normal in a relationship. Now, if you interview these people, go back to their own childhoods, you may find certain indicators of why they keep looking for that. If you have children and you have a daughter, for example, your daughter's going to probably look for a man similar to you, unless you're really, really bad to them and they have made a decision at some point that I will never be like that parent. Otherwise, you'll end up marrying your father or marrying your mother. Even though that sounds really weird, you just unconsciously do that.
Yeah. And you haven't trained your subconscious, or your subconscious hasn't been able to interact with your conscious mind well enough to do something different. I understand what you're saying.
So it is about this retraining. People, we're so busy in life, working, families, paying the bills, that we forget or not realize that it is the better version of us that gets the better version of what we want in life.
Yes. So true. Do you work with people around the world?
I do. So if anyone wants me to travel to their country, we can talk about that, of course.
Yeah. If people want to reach out to you, how do they do that? That was going to be my next question.
So they can go to a couple of websites. They can go to My Growth, where there's a contact us on the top, and they can just write to us. And they
Is it just mygrowth.com or?
Yeah, mygrowthcorporation.com.
mygrowthcorporation.com. Okay.
Yep. Or they can go to mannyfiteni.com. So MANNYFITENI.com. And they can just reach out to us and tell us what they're looking at doing. And we can then talk about either traveling, or we can do this online as well. It depends on the training and how much training that they want to do. But if you want to excel with and build high-performing teams, then you need to be a high-performing leader first. And then we can build your teams out with you as well.
Right. I've always believed that every interaction I have, including being on these podcasts, is an opportunity for me to learn. And as I tell people, if I'm not learning at least as much as anybody else, I'm not doing my job very well. I just think life is such an adventure. Whenever I hire people, I learn from them. No matter how good or how not good they are, I'll still learn from them. And I think that's an important attitude to have.
Agree.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. Even with our little interruption, we've been doing this for well over an hour. Can you believe it?
I can, because you're very conversational, and obviously it's a topic that I talk about, so I could talk for hours, literally.
I know. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank everyone for listening or watching us wherever you are. Would appreciate it if you'd reach out to me. I'd love to get your thoughts. You can reach me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. Wherever you're listening or watching, please give us a 5-star rating. And more important even than that, please give us a great review. We love your reviews. And reviews are what people pay attention to when they're deciding whether they want to listen to us. And so we hope we're earning your trust and that you'll give us a good review. Manny, for you and for anyone else out there, if you know anyone else who you think ought to be a good guest on our podcast, we'd love it if you'd let us know. Feel free to reach out to me, introduce us, and we'll go forward from there. But for now, I'm sorry, but
shall do. That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
But for now, I want to thank you, Manny. This has been great, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here on a Saturday for you.
Thank you so much, and I've enjoyed it. So thanks a lot, Michael.
If you're ready to go deeper into the ideas that shape how we see ourselves and others, I have a free gift for you. Head over to michaelhingson.com and download my free ebook, Blinded by Fear. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep choosing to live with an unstoppable mindset.